Hey, welcome back to my corner of the internet. If you're new here, my name is Liz, business coach for women of color. And today we're going to chat a bit about how to transition out of the nonprofit space. I did a video maybe almost a year ago at this point. It's been a minute, y'all, talking about why you might be working at a nonprofit and still finding that you're a bit unfulfilled by the work that you do. And in that video, I basically talk about how working at a nonprofit is no different from working at a for-profit, like working in corporate. There's no big difference there. So the issues that we find with our employers, especially during late stage capitalism, are going to bleed into the nonprofit space. And unfortunately, many of us go into nonprofits thinking that that's where we can make impact on the world and do something that actually helps people. And then we find out that it's not actually necessarily the case or how it works. So for this video, I want to talk about different ways that you can think about transitioning out of the nonprofit space. If you're done, you're ready to go. There are a few things that we can talk about today. And the main paths that I'll be talking about will be one, finding a different job outside of a nonprofit, and two, going the entrepreneurship route. And I'm going to do my best to try and talk about these different routes with as little bias as possible. My intention is not to make you think that one side is particularly better than the other. My intention is really to help you have a new perspective on different things that you may not have thought were previously available to you. So we're going to first start off with what it can look like to transition out of the nonprofit space into a different type of role, into maybe a corporate type of environment, or just a different industry than what you're used to working in. And in order to do that, I'd say the first thing that you want to understand that'll really help you is understanding business in general. Business is, for better or worse, really how things move and shake in society right now. And most jobs are involved in some type of business realm, right? So even if you're in a nonprofit's still technically a business. It's just a business that technically isn't supposed to be making a profit that goes back to the owners of the business. It's really supposed to just serve the purpose of helping whatever community it's designed to serve. So it's still important to understand business in general, because you want to be able to speak the language of potential future employers that you might be considering working for. So the language of business is this common language that no matter where you're working, everyone is speaking. All businesses or organizations, nonprofits, they're concerned with how do they bring money in to then distribute it towards the necessary resources that they have deemed as the necessary resources, right? So if you're working at a for-profit company, maybe, that money is supposed to flow towards not just the salaries of the employees, but it's supposed to also flow towards things like the share price, the stock value of the company, because there's a responsibility to investors. If you're working at a nonprofit, then that money is supposed to flow into not just employees, but to also fund the programs that are servicing the people, communities, or whatever your nonprofit is impacting, to fund those needs. So in order to do anything really in this society, in the world today, you need money to do it. So no matter where you're working, you will have an advantage if you can understand just the basic language of business. And as someone who graduated with a master's degree in international management, I can confidently say that higher education does a real shitty job at teaching people to understand business. Like, higher ed does a terrible job of this. And Many of us leave school understanding the concepts and the theories around what it takes to build a business, but we don't actually understand what it means in practice, right? Like we know enough so that we can regurgitate it for a test to get an A, to increase our GPA, to then get a job. But we don't actually understand it to the point where we can like embody it, where we can confidently talk about it, where we can explain it to a 3-year-old. Like we don't leave higher ed with that knowledge. So where else are you going to learn it? Ideally, you would learn it on the job at wherever you're working, but unfortunately, that also does not happen. And what often happens in these spaces, in nonprofits and in, regular corporate jobs alike, is that people are just used to doing their particular job, like their particular role. Everyone stays in their silos and they just do the work and the tasks that were assigned to them as the cog in the machine of the organization that they are in. But they don't actually understand how it all connects to the whole. They don't actually understand like how what they do at the individual level is actually important. And in order to understand that, you have to understand what your organization is doing, what your nonprofit is doing, what your business is doing. And in order to do that, you have to understand the basics of business. And the basics of business includes, how do we make money as an organization, right? And when we make money, like how much do we have to spend in terms of expenses to make that money? And then what's left over as profit? So your revenue minus your expenses, like what's left over as profit, and then where does that go and why? Like just the basic building blocks of that. And then the work is really understanding how you and the work that you do connects back to that. But that is the fundamental language of business. So that's the fundamental language that your nonprofit that you're working for is concerned about, that your corporate job that you might want to go into next is concerned about. Like that is the language of what is happening, right? So what you want to do if you're looking to transition out of nonprofit and into a different job is to start thinking about how you can translate the work that you do into the language of business. Whatever you do in your role, how does it connect back to the revenue of an organization? Like money coming in, funding coming in, right, for a nonprofit? Or the work that you do, how does it contribute to the expenses? Now, expenses isn't necessarily a dirty word, right? Like if you don't have expenses, then you can't operate and function to do the work that you are meant to do and intended to do as an organization, right? So expenses is not a dirty word. So maybe the work that you do connects to the expenses. But then you want to understand like how the work that you do at the individual level on a day-to-day basis contributes to this overall map of what's happening in terms of like how your wherever you work is actually succeeding and functioning and performing well. Like how did the things connect? Like translate what you do on a day-to-day basis to the actual language of business. And then when you do that, here's where things can get, dare I say, I won't say fun. We'll say interesting. So first you're understanding, business, the language of business, and you're translating the work that you actually do on a day-to-day basis to the language of business. And then you're looking to take on projects or even create your own projects that help to improve things. Now, the reason why I want to start here is because if you're thinking about transitioning out of the nonprofit space into another job, you need meat for your resume. It's not easy to just kind of have a resume that's completely focused on one particular thing and then move to a completely different job or even move to a completely different industry. Like it may not be that simple, but the way to make it a little bit easier is if you can actually beef up your resume with things that you've done that have contributed to the overall performance of where you're working at right now. So that can include taking on projects or creating your own projects to help you do that. Now, in order to know what you can do that will actually help impact, where you're working now, you have to understand how what you do connects back to the language of business connects back to like how your business, wherever you're working, your nonprofit, wherever your job is, like you have to understand like what it is about your role. What can you do in this position that you are in the nonprofit where you work? How can you create something or work on a project or contribute your perspective or your skill, your expertise, whatever, to help move things in a positive direction? And then that's what you want to put on your resume. It all goes together. So you want to keep your resume up to date with these things. And when you can speak in the language of business on your resume, what you have specifically done to actually create impact where you're working, it is much easier for someone else, a different employer who's in a completely different industry or maybe even in a completely different field that you're in, to see how you're a thinker, how you're strategic, how you're a doer, how you pay attention to these things. Because employers, managers, at the end of the day, they're just looking for someone who can help make their job easy, right? Like they not only want you to just fill a hole, they also want to see how you can make their jobs a little bit easier. And if they can see you through your resume as someone who actually thinks about these high level things, then it'll be much easier to be able to get those positions, like much easier to get those positions. So as you're beefing up your resume, like continuing to note evidence on your resume as to why you are an amazing candidate for, whatever role that it is that you're applying for, by translating your day-to-day tasks into the language of business, then you use that to apply for the jobs you actually want. So wherever it is that you actually would like to be, wherever you'd like to actually work, like use your new and improved resume with all this great evidence as to work that you've done, use it to then apply for those jobs that you do want, wherever they might actually be. And then just a quick thing about, the job hunt. Like the job hunt also is not easy. Like it can take time to find positions that you like. And also, it depending on, the season of the time of the year, what's going on right now in the world, you could have a lot of competition in terms of the job hunt. So it can take time. It's about quality and quantity. Like I want to emphasize that, where there's no such thing as having a resume that's just so brilliant that every single job you apply for, you'll automatically get an interview. Like that's not how that works. So I like to remind folks that when you're applying for jobs, it's also about that quantity too. But, your resume, the bulk of it will be quality if you are committed to translating just, your tasks into the language of business and inputting ways that you have contributed to the performance of your organization as a whole, versus just copying and pasting your job description into your resume. Like a lot of people do that. That's not quite enough. You want to actually translate that into what it is you actually do that impacts the performance of where you're at, so that you have evidence for a future employer that you are more than capable of doing this job. So, but it all begins with understanding business, right? That is literally the first step. And you might actually find that as you're better understanding like how wherever you work, your job, your organization operates, that as you better understand that and you feel more confident in taking on new opportunities and voicing areas of where there could be improvement and taking the initiative to get those things going, you could find that maybe when you're focusing more on the stuff you're interested in versus just clearing out your inbox all day, you might actually like where you are. So something to be said there. Now, so that's path one, right? Path one is basically transitioning out of the nonprofit space to find a job outside of the nonprofit space. And then path two, we have entrepreneurship. And I know that social media loves to paint entrepreneurship as this picture of like, you can hit 6 figures in 6 months, you can have these 20K months, like all this insane, like sensationalism, right? It's not all like that. It isn't, especially in the beginning stages. If you're building from scratch, it can take time. Nay, it will take time for you to be able to create a consistent client base in order to hit the income goals that you want. It won't take forever, but it will take some time. So I do always like to just mention that first, just to kind of help ground everyone and just kind of bring you back into a little bit of reality, just because the social media highlight reel will just have you like head in the stars for your entire life. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Like, dream big, have those big ass dreams, but then also don't hold yourself hostage to them and make them your benchmark for success versus like the actual realistic incremental steps of building a business from scratch, right? So that's kind of the trade-off is, if you go to create impact in a job, you already have a group of people like at your disposal that you can experiment on and see in real time the impact you're creating. So for instance, like my background is in HR. So in HR, I have access to all of these employees to see like what initiatives work, what doesn't work, and get that instant feedback. But if you're starting a business from scratch, you might not have that many people around you to give you that instant feedback that you want. Like, it takes time to actually build that up. So for the first few years of you starting your business, it's a lot of you doing and believing in what you're doing, but still not quite getting the evidence you would like to see that what you're doing is the right path. And then just to drop some more things into that mix, there's no such thing as the right path. So definitely entrepreneurship comes with tons more freedom, flexibility. Technically, there are no income caps, technically, but you have to be able to kind of slog through those first few years of just having, just believing in what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it, and having your own back as to why, and being willing to wait a few years to see that kind of come back to you. So with entrepreneurship, if you are considering starting a business, then the first thing that you really want to focus on is getting to the root of your why. Like, what impact are you trying to create through your business? And making sure that that foundation is solid. Because if that foundation is solid and you have a strong why, then it's much easier to be able to let things grow incrementally, to be out on the lookout for potential like evidence of success, that you're on the right path, being able to pivot, not being too concerned with failure in the short term, because you know that it'll still lead to success in the long term. So if you are interested if you have any questions about today's video, if you have any questions either about the path of, trying to transition out of your job into something different, or if you have questions about transitioning out of 9-to-5 life into entrepreneurship, let me know in the comments below what those questions would be. What are the obstacles that are kind of standing in your way? For most people, including my clients, you're doing both at the same time. If you want to start a business, you also are still working at your 9-to-5 while you incrementally build your business on the side, which is honestly a smart thing to do. I mean, in today's world, there's so much stuff that can happen at the drop of a hat. Like, it's good to diversify your income, but you just want to make sure that you're doing it in a way that doesn't require you to hustle, that doesn't require you to overwork yourself, that doesn't require you to do things that you feel are sleazy or icky. You want to make sure that whatever it is that you're doing, that you're behind it 100%. So let me know in the comments below if you have questions. If you are interested in starting a business, or if you actually have a business and you're just curious about how to get to that first 1K, let me know in the comments below. I do have one-on-one coaching available for women of color who are service-based entrepreneurs who do need that extra level of support. Like, maybe they know what they need to do, but for some reason they're not quite sure why they're not doing it. That's the type of work that I do in my one-on-one coaching. But any other questions, feel free to drop them below and I'll be happy to answer them. All right. Take care.